And good evening. It's April 2nd, 2024, and we're in our next collection of discussions in our Outside the Class series. It's another series from Tim Mackie called Eat This Book. On TheDustyFeet.com, in the Outside the Class section, we have the Eat This Book source video section set up for review. Now, the purpose of Outside the Class is for you to listen to the in-class lecture first. That would be in the source video playlist. We try to keep these to about 15 to 20 minutes or so and make them easy to catch and easier to catch up on. So we're going to continue our Eat This Book series with Gideon, testing faith on Outside the Class on the Dusty Feet. And before we forget, if you find these kinds of podcasts useful, that's when you click the subscribe button. The reminders, they just help you. But also, if you think these might be useful to others, and you click that like button, because that is the way that YouTube chooses to share these to more people, if they wish. Eat This Book, Gideon, Testing Faith, Part 4. So as we ended last week, looking back now after going through this story, is this really a good thing? Is Gideon really behaving and responding the way we should be? I agree that he's responding probably as we would, but is that really the thing to do? So we're now at this point in the story where God's involvement is going to become very apparent. Because he tells Gideon to rally the troops and then meet him on the hill. So let's keep a thought in the back of our minds. Gideon tested God 3 times. He had the sacrifice, right? Then he had the 2 times with the fleece. Well, the first test, back with Gideon, after the first sacrifice test with the messenger, God had him tear down the other altar, do a sacrifice himself, so his obedience was tested. Bit of cowardliness under the cover of night, but he does obey. Then we have 2 more tests to come. Just keep that in mind as we roll this story forward. So God's going to give him instructions. Gideon's call is rather successful, actually, I would think, because he went around, he rallied some allies, right, along with rallying some of his troops. Gideon's shofar call? 22,000 men. It's a lot of men. And it's interesting because it doesn't say that God inspired these men to show up. They just responded to the call. You know, it's interesting to see what happens when we get past this. But their initial response and that they wanted to get involved. Maybe they're just tired of the Midianites and the Amalekites stealing their stuff. And they want them gone. So they answer Gideon's call. But then God decides that he's going to test Gideon again. I'm not sure if we should be surprised by this or not, but God decides to work Gideon a bit. God comes back at Gideon. Gideon, too many guys here. We need to find out who really wants to be here. So God tells Gideon to ask him which one of you are still afraid and still trembling. I know you answered my call, but if you're still afraid, go home. 12,000 men left. No chastisement from God, no shame. They just left. You know, maybe they were caught up in the moment when they heard the shofar, and now, seeing the folks on the other side of the hill, maybe they got a little truer test of heart. Besides, God knows this is not their battle, this is his. So let them go home. Would it be disingenuous to say that, poof, 12,000 people disappeared? But here's the test. 12,000 people out of the picture. So God comes at Gideon again. This time he tells him 10,000. Still too many people. So I want you to take the men down to the water. I'm going to test them. And I'm going to tell you who you should keep and who you should not. For Gideon, this is going to be an eye-opener. Because God says, watch him drink. those that scoop up the water with their hands and lap it out, they're the guys you're going to keep. But those that just kneel down at the water and drink it, well, they're the ones you're not going to keep. So Gideon watches. 300 drank the way God said to keep. The rest, well, you get the picture. Not the numbers Gideon had expected. I wonder if his heart dropped when he realized that these big numbers, that 22,000, that big exciting thing, that great rally call, and he watched it dwindle to 300 men. I wonder what his heart felt like at that moment. Like I said before, are Gideon's actions really what we should be doing? Is this really a good thing to test God? This test of faith, is it good? I'm not compelled. I'm more convinced that maybe we should look at this story a little closer. And if we think we're going to ask God for this test, are we also prepared for the second part, the pushback? Like I said, Gideon had 3 tests: the sacrifice and 2 water tests. The first, obey. Tear down the altar, build an altar. Second, he tested the men. 12,000 men left. Third, further tested the men. 300 remain. I find it a bit funny to me that men in Scripture at times are referred to in allegory as sheep. Yeah? And the fleece, sheep fleece, was involved in 2 tests. And the men in 2 tests. Made me smile. Are we really ready for the pushback test from God? Are we aware that it's even possible? More points to ponder. I'll go with Tim's choice of grace, with God bestowing grace to Gideon. But here's a thought. Is it something that we should push to need, to ask for? Is the need for grace a good thing? Okay, that's a rabbit hole that we will not wander down today, but just put that in a box, put it on the shelf for another day, right? But God does teach Gideon a lot, and Gideon does a lot, right? The story, please keep reading that whole piece because it really is really exciting. I'm just not compelled that all of this is good or necessary. Yet, yes, God's grace and patience will prevail. His will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Let me make this perfectly clear. I am not chastising or judging Gideon or Jerubbaal. I am very aware that I have done this very thing in the past, and I'm not really sure of the results, to be honest. I am aware that this is me, and I look back, not to repeat, but to not repeat, to learn from the mistakes. And remember, look how far down the road we are. At this point, argue we have the whole story. Gideon was at his point. He just had the stories that were told to him. He hears what he's told. And the Torah, those first 5 scrolls, they're the source. So I can cut Gideon some slack. He doesn't have a Bible. People don't have their own Bibles. Not back then. We don't have that slack. We're in a different place, a different time. Gideon pushing God. Interesting way to say this. It's not about discerning God. It's about looking at our own hearts. Because this actually flips it. Because it's not about the discernment of God and is God listening to us. This is really about discerning our own hearts. This is about us needing to be available to God without having to do this. To be able to take even the beginning with the messenger, the initial engagement, and say, that's enough for me. And then I ask God, where are we going? What are we going to do? Bible in hand, we have so many more experiences that are recorded for our edification. The cautionary tales. The tales of victory. the instructions, the warning labels, so that we can avoid some of these consequences in the first place. But how do we view this book? This is a deeper question as well, and the expectations that we have from it. I really liked how Tim wrapped this up, and he brings up the point of us getting to grow up. And it was for Gideon too. Not just sit back on stories or circumstances and complain. Because that's an adult thought. That's a man Gideon thought. Who can be a valiant warrior. More to ponder. We ask at times for the discernment to hear God's call. Interesting question. I like it. But maybe there's a precursor question to turn that discernment on myself. Is my heart ready? Am I ready to discern God's call? Because I think what we get with Gideon is a constant test of his heart. Is he really in? Is he really committed? Does he really want to listen? All these things are part and parcel to ready to hear the message of the messenger. Are we ready? Are our hearts really ready? Can we look at ourselves? Are we really ready to listen to the message of the messenger? Because the truth is, I don't want to do a Gideon. I don't want a Gideon cautionary tale for me. Have I probably had them? Yes. But I don't want more in the future. Honest with ourselves, honest with each other, heart ready. I think of the parables of Jesus, more than a few, or when somebody is returning. Right? There's an expectation, and I'm more and more compelled that is about the heart check. It's not about having a lamp lit or things unhidden, but am I ready? Is my heart ready for the visit, for the master to return, to hold me accountable? How will I respond? Well, I guess we're going to have to read that in a story about me someday in the future. So this wraps up Gideon, testing of faith. The next section in Eat This Book series is Israel's exile, hitting bottom. So thanks for being with us on this engaging and challenging series so far. We are 5 videos down with just 2 more to go. And thanks for with us tonight on Outside the Class on the Dusty Feet.